And as the police know themselves, and you yourselves know, well, I was in Luton taking the kids to the pictures. I was a bit of a womaniser, but that's all.
It wasn't me, and I had nothing to do with it. I have not paid any money. I have not done it.
This case spans an unbelievable 40 years. It exposes the very darkest of human nature. What follows is one of the most twisting cases I have ever covered. This is Dark Case Documentaries. Viewer discretion is advised for this educational documentary. Welcome or welcome back. I'm uploading daily for the rest of the year, so make sure that you're subscribed with notifications turned on. Thank you so much to all of my patrons. If your name is on screen right now, then you're a legend. The Patreon is linked below, but zero pressure from me. Our love and respect goes out to everyone affected by today's dark case. Carol Morgan was born on the 26th of December 1944. She had two children, Dean and Jane, with her husband Richard Curtis. The family lived together in Swindon, England, UK. Carol was a devoted mother besotted with her children, and she was also a loving wife. Still though, despite her best efforts, her marriage to Richard was rocky and they subsequently divorced. Carol remained with her children in the family home, and Richard's involvement in their lives eventually dwindled. As a result, Carol began seeking support at an organisation for single parents called Gingerbread. The organisation seeks to help single parents with financial, emotional, and practical needs through their helpline and community outreach. It was through Gingerbread that Carol met a man named Alan Morgan, a man 5 years younger than her. Alan's affiliation with the organisation is kind of unclear. However, not long after meeting, the two started dating. And by 1977, 5 years after her divorce from Richard, the new couple were married. They appeared happy and Alan moved into Carol's family home with her and the children. She was excited for her life to start all over again. In December of 1979, Carol and Alan bought a small corner shop that was situated at 51 Finch Crescent in Linslade, Bedfordshire, and so the family relocated, moving into the flat above the shop. They called the shop Morgan's Store. The business was bought using Carol's share from the sale of the house, and partly from a business loan procured in life insurance surety between both Alan and Carol. Carol was immediately very well liked in the village, and she'd been described as friendly, thoughtful and warm. Many of her neighbours considered her an especially good mother. Unfortunately though, not everything was going well. The business was struggling, presumably due to its location and the type of goods being sold, and just a year later, the family was described as living hand to mouth. This dream of a new life had quickly turned into a nightmare. The Morgans' accountant at the time stated that he was concerned that sufficient income was not being generated for the family. In addition, Jane, Carol's daughter, recalled several checks bouncing when payments to suppliers had to be made. In the UK, we have a saying for situations like this: you're robbing Peter to pay Paul. To make matters worse, it was around this time that Alan began having an affair with a woman named Margaret Spooner. Many believe that Margaret was only one of Alan's many lovers, and even he has described himself as a womanizer. Carol learned of the affair when Margaret's husband, Michael, confronted Alan at the shop, threatening him and insisting he end the affair. Carol was shattered and heartbroken, but nonetheless, she seemed determined to make her marriage work. In some small way, it seems she blamed herself. By August 1981, several months after learning of the affair, Carol confided in her uncle. She said that things were getting better in her marriage and stated that her and Alan were now being intimate again. This was significant to her as prior to August, their relationship had grown distant, cold, and lacking in physical contact. In addition, on the 11th of August 1981, Carol visited the Citizens Advice Bureau for support with the couple's marital problems. She had even scheduled a session with a marital guidance counsellor for the 18th of August 1981. However, Carol would never get the chance, to try to make her marriage good again. On the 13th of August 1981, just 2 days after visiting the Citizens Advice Bureau, at around 5 p.m, Alan took both of his stepchildren, Dean and Jane, to the Odeon Cinema in Luton, about half an hour from where they lived. He stated that they deserved a treat for helping in the shop, and that going to see a movie would be a small but fun reward for their hard work. However, this meant that Carol was alone in the corner shop for the evening. Upon returning home from the cinema at around 10:30 that night, Alan sent the children upstairs immediately and then he entered the shop. It was there he found Carol brutally hacked to death in the storeroom. Alan then called the police. They arrived promptly and entered the crime scene. Police indeed found Carol in the storeroom and deduced that she had been working there when she was attacked. She had been bludgeoned with a sharp object, an item they thought was either a sickle or a machete. However, no weapon was found. Superintendent Brian Prickett stated that the murder was the worst attack he'd seen on a human being. 2 fingerprints were found atop one of the freezers, yet most of the crime scene was relatively bare. Not much evidence to be found. Finally, they discovered that around £500, along with multiple boxes of cigarettes, were missing, suggesting that the motive of the attack was robbery. The murder prompted a massive investigation, all under the leadership of Superintendent Brian Prickett. The village was left in complete shock. Subsequently, 1,204 suspects were interviewed, fingerprints were checked, and over 600 witness statements were taken, all in an attempt to piece together the incident and track down the killer. On the fateful night at around 7 p.m, multiple witnesses claimed to have seen a man walking down the street from the corner shop. They stated that he was carrying 2 plastic bags, and they saw him getting into a dark green estate car. As a result, nearly 30,000 vehicles were checked. The suspect was identified by witnesses as being between 17 and 20 years old. Tracking the man down would not be an easy task. The building's layout allowed for 2 entrances into the corner shop, one from the street and one from the flat. Whilst there were several eyewitnesses of the man leaving the shop, no one saw him entering. Police therefore suspected that the man may have had access to the flat, entering from above. Still, despite the mass investigation, the police were unable to secure any evidence that was not circumstantial. There had been several attacks and murders of a similar nature, all on female shopkeepers in recent months, and police feared that they may have a serial attacker or a possible serial killer on their hands. In April 1981, Susan Sheen was attacked in the shop that she owned, sustaining several cuts to the head by a sharp, heavy object. Thankfully, she recovered, but did not identify her attacker. The following year, in January 1982, another incident took place. Dora Pratt, who was 76 at the time, was attacked in her flat above her shop in Ipswich. She was found unconscious by a police constable, having sustained blows to her head, and around £200 was missing from the shop. She regained consciousness in hospital, describing the attacker as a young man, aged about 20, with silver-rimmed glasses. Unfortunately, Dora did pass as a result of the injuries sustained in the attack, and her investigation eventually went cold. Carol's investigation, however, was still underway, although it wasn't promising. Still, Superintendent Prickett became convinced that they were missing something crucial, and so he turned his attention to Carol's husband, Alan. Prickett claims that he had initially suspected Alan, but the husband's alibi was airtight. He was at the cinema with his stepkids, and of course there was that tie-in with the other shopkeeper attacks. However, Alan began giving interviews to the press, and it was there that he was coming across as arrogant, and he was actually seeming to enjoy the attention.
There's quite a few other people who won't shop here because they're afraid of being caught up in the gossip.
What are they saying about you?
It's been found that I killed my wife, and as the police know themselves, and you yourselves know, well, I was in Luton, taking the kids to the pictures.
What grounds do they think they've got for saying that?
Well, because I was happy-go-lucky, I suppose. I was a bit of a womaniser, but that's all. That's the only reason.
How did the death of your wife affect you?
Affect me? Well, I closed the business for 7 weeks while the police were investigating it. I lost a lot of stock throughout, and I've had to sell the business now at a loss. The kids are alright, but I think myself and the kids think that it'd be better to get away, because it's their future. They've got to live with a shadow over them all the time.
Are the police any nearer, in fact, catching the person that did kill your wife?
Well, they're saying they are, because they're eliminating people all the time. So they must be nearer to catching the person.
If ever they do catch the killer, will you come back here?
I don't know. It all depends. I'd like to get hold of the killer, though. That's what I'd come back for.
He also showed no indications of remorse or grief for what had happened to Carol. In fact, one of the reporters who interviewed him later admitted to feeling suspicious about him, attributing his doubts to Alan's unusual responses and steely demeanour. He also moved in with his mistress, Margaret Spooner, soon after Carol's death. Superintendent then recalled that on the night of Carol's death, Alan seemed unusually calm and displayed no signs of upset despite the death of his wife. He also noted that it was suspicious that Alan had sent his children upstairs immediately once they arrived home without saying goodnight to their mother, suggesting that he may have known what he was about to uncover and did not want them to find their mother's body. Many of the community members also noted that it was strange for Alan to have taken the children to the cinema in the first place. They stated that he never spent time with them alone, and certainly was not known to treat them. Prickett began to believe that this was Alan's way of ensuring his cast Alan alibi, and not just a fun night out. In addition, officers discovered that Alan had withdrawn a large sum of money the night before the attack, and made a large order of cigarettes a few nights before the incident. They also knew that it was likely that the killer had access to the flat, and that, in lieu of witnesses seeing him outside, he must have entered the shop from upstairs. Finally, law enforcement also became aware of the fact that a few months before her murder, Carol had changed her will, leaving everything to Alan. By this stage, Superintendent Prickett believed Alan was involved in his wife's murder. He suspected that Alan had paid the attacker and conspired to kill his wife for her life insurance and his inheritance so that he could start a new life with his mistress. However, all of this evidence was again deemed circumstantial. All that Prickett had was a hunch, so Alan was never charged. Instead, the case went cold. 40 years passed and it was now 2018. Cold case investigator Detective Superintendent Carl Foster, along with his team, began reviewing cases, and Carol Morgan's case stood out. They started by re-interviewing every living witness who was interviewed in 1981. The process of reviving Carol's case was painstaking, but Superintendent Foster had a hunch they could crack the case. 3 years later, in 2021, Jane Bunting would make a startling revelation. Detective Superintendent Foster stated that when he knocked on Jane's door, she opened it and then said, "I've been waiting for you to come visit me for 40 years. Jane revealed that when she was 17, Alan approached her in a pub and discussed the various ways that he might kill his wife. She claimed that he said he hates Carol and doesn't want to be married to her. She says he also stated that he wished she were dead, and wouldn't an accident be nice? Furthermore, Alan asked Jane whether her boyfriend at the time, who had previously been in jail, may be willing to help. Jane stated that she was shocked and appalled, and she left the pub immediately.
It wasn't me, and I had nothing to do with it.
And you had a new woman that you moved in with, yeah?
Margaret, Ken.
And I say you, someone that you'd already been having sex with. But now you could carry on a relationship with her without any complications at all.
Who?
You said the police weren't looking at you have been involved in this at all.
No, quite nothing to that. I don't know.
But you, after Carol's funeral, you just carried on. Never went back to the cemetery, is that right?
No. Don't I ever do. So how did you know I didn't, that the murder wasn't in the idea? So I sent the kids upstairs. Well, how do you know the murder's not upstairs? There's no by the kids downstairs. Those disappeared. So I sent them upstairs. Because they had to go in. in the bed. I don't know. Is it because you knew nobody was there?
No.
You knew this was going to happen.
No.
And you knew they'd already gone.
What?
The plan was they would lock up behind him, you'd give them a key. What's that? All right, was this the monkey? No, you tell it. I'm telling you now. No, I have not played anybody.
I have not.
Don't.
Finally, in 2024, Alan Morgan was tried in Luton Crown Court for the murder of his wife, Carol Morgan. With Jane Bunting's testimony, prosecutors felt their case was strong, and along with other testimonies and witness statements, they brought forward the evidence that was previously deemed merely circumstantial. In court, the original lead detective on the case, Superintendent Prickett, stated he was very grateful that Jane had come forward and propelled the case, because he had been unable to shake the investigation from his mind, calling it a thorn in his side. He states that he always knew Alan was guilty, but he simply couldn't prove it. He also stated that, unfortunately, he doesn't feel he could have done anything differently, and that Jane's statement was simply the missing piece. Pamela Smith, Carol's cousin, gave a victim impact statement during the trial, describing the horror that befell Carol's parents, who were absolutely crushed by the event. Margaret Spooner, Alan's mistress, was also charged because prosecutors suggested that she knew about the plot. Tapes played during the trial revealed Alan shushing Margaret in a police van for fear of being recorded. He also wrote her a letter on the year of the murder, indicating that he desperately needed her trust. Carol's children were left motherless and spent the majority of their young lives raised by their stepfather and his mistress. Alan kept the children away from their grandparents, who had already suffered the loss of their only child. All of this time, Alan lived most of his adult life free, and he was financially secure due to Carol's life insurance and the money he received from Carol's recently altered will. Detective Superintendent Carl Foster suggested that Carol was effectively erased from all memory, including those of her own 2 children who have grown up without their mother, being raised by the man responsible for her death. After an exhaustive 2-month trial, the jury broke away and deliberated. Margaret Spooner was cleared of all charges. However, Alan Morgan was found guilty for conspiring in the murder of his wife, Carol Morgan. The judge sentenced him to 22 years in prison. Alan Morgan is 74, and he will presumably spend the rest of his life locked up. He, however, maintains his innocence. On one side, justice has been served, but now it seems far too late. Not to mention the fact that the killer, if alive, is still out there. Alan Morgan is the only person who knows his identity, and I wouldn't hold your breath. Please make sure that you're subscribed and hit like if you appreciate what I'm doing here. I'd love to see your thoughts and your discussions about this case down in the comments. And remember, I'm posting daily for the rest of the year. Be careful out there, and I'll see you soon.